Well, hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I have got a wonderful guest today on the channel that I'm really excited to hear his story. I've heard a lot about him from one of our mutual friends of the channel, Gabrielle Clark, who I know many of you know and love and appreciate. And I'm really looking forward to being able to share Shawn's story with everyone today. But before we get into it, speaking of our friend Gabrielle Clark, and it actually, funnily enough, and I didn't actually plan it this way, it just worked out this way. Funnily enough, I am doing a webinar tonight with Gabrielle Clark at 8 p.m. on Actively Unwoke. And we're going to be talking about building a case, a step-by-step guide for gathering evidence for a lawsuit against your school. This is a live event and it's a private event, so it's not going to be streamed anywhere. You have to get a ticket to get access to it. And Gabs is going to talk about her process for not only going through the process of being herself the very first parent in the country to file the first federal lawsuit against critical race theory in schools and what that was like, but also she's really going to help families in order to find lawyers, gather evidence from their schools, prepare themselves for going through the process of suing your school, because quite frankly, lawsuits are one of the most powerful weapons that we have when it comes to fighting back against the woke left. It is something that we should all be availing ourselves of. And honestly, many parents of school-age children have cases against their schools, and either they don't know that they have a legal case, or they might be afraid to act on it. And what that means, Gabs has been there. She can walk you through the process. That's going to be tonight in about 3 hours time. You still have time to register by going over to activelyunwoke.com/events. And if you can't make it for the live show, but you want to see it, I recommend you register anyway, because you'll get the on-demand recording as soon as it's processed. So basically what happens is we do the webinar, then they have to process the recording, and probably later that night or tomorrow at the latest, you will be able to get an access to the on-demand recording. You'll get an email notification, but that's only going to happen if you sign up for it. You can find out more information about that at activelyunwoke.com/events. And I think that the last webinar I did with Gabs was just so amazing. I have high hopes for this one. I can't wait, and looking forward to seeing everyone on that later today. Now, of course, I want to let you know that if you are concerned about what's going on in the schools, I am currently in the midst of a crowdfunding campaign, because I am raising money to build out a training program to help all parents everywhere use publicly available information to find out what the schools are teaching their kids. It's called the Schools Exposed campaign. You can find it right now on Indiegogo for 20 more days. There are some great perks you can get by contributing to the campaign, to include being one of the very first parents to get access to the program when it launches in January. That's going to be a $50 gift of support. For right now, anyway, there are only 50 spaces available at the $50 level. I'm going to sell it for a $99 one-time fee once it launches. That covers the cost of expanding technology. It also covers my cost in terms of like the administration of the program, my time and all that. So this is a great time to get in there, because once it hits in January, that price is going to go up to $99. You can get it for $50 right now. And there are, oh gosh, I'm going to have to do math, 22 more spots left for that. So plenty of space, but they're going out. So you might want to get that. After that, it's going to go up to $75. There's some other great perks you can get as well, to include some hand knit shawls by me. These are shawls from my private collection that I've spent weeks or months knitting. It almost breaks my heart to give them away. Honestly, I'm having lots of feelings about it. But those are available as perks if you want to support the program. And if you want to go all the way up to the top level for the program, I will hand knit you a customized shawl at the $1,000 level. We'll work to customize it. It'll be beautiful. You can find out more information by searching Schools Exposed on Indiegogo, or you can head over to, you can see it in the ticker below, unwokearmy.com/parents, and that's going to redirect you right to the Indiegogo campaign so you can learn more about what I'm trying to do. One last announcement before we bring on our amazing guest. Now, of course, it's Tuesday, and in addition to doing the webinar later today, I also have another stream later today, and that's going to be at 9:30 tonight. And this is a little bit more of a lighthearted, fun stream to blow off some steam. It's called Nothing Remotely Controversial, where every Tuesday night at 9:30, I bring my friend and my coach, Joshua the Psychic, onto the channel, and we do a great show where we talk about the news and what's going on in the world. And Joshua uses his psychic magic, and prowess to help us peer beneath the surface and make predictions about what's going to happen. I really want to ask Joshua about what's going to go on with this Twitter deal tonight. Elon Musk has said he's going to buy Twitter, and Twitter has accepted. And I would really like to never get banned again on Twitter because I was banned for a month. I didn't like that too much. I would really like that for never happen again. And so I'm going to ask Joshua tonight what's going on with Elon Musk and Twitter. You can come and ask your questions as well, and that's going to be at 9:30 tonight on this channel. All right, guys, it's time to bring in our wonderful guest for today, and I know I'm going to mispronounce his name, even though I just asked him how to pronounce it, but I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce it again. Shawn McBreairty is the director of special projects at Maine First Project, a nonprofit organization offering grassroots activist and advocacy training in multiple areas. For over 2 years, Shawn has been exposing critical race theory and hyper-sexualization of minors, or grooming, in the classrooms, as well as many dangers within the programs, teachings, and curriculum of Maine and the nation's government-run K through 12 schools. Make sure you check out Shawn's podcast, Main Source of Truth. That can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, all the usual ones. And you can follow him on social media. All the links are in the description below. Shawn, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the channel.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity. I've been checking out some of your Twitter information, and one of the things I wrote down as a note is that daily scoreboard tweet that you recently put up. I thought was just genius. I could be using that for teachers, trans cult members, school board members, or local media, and maybe I'll do the same thing. So great introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Awesome. Well, I do think I actually have a book called Actively Unwoke where I put my 11 rules for fighting back against the woke left, and I think that shaming them and mocking them relentlessly is absolutely a tactic we should be engaged in. Not all the time. We have to be serious too, but I think a little shame never hurt anyone, if I'm honest about it.
Yeah, I mean, Saul Alinsky and the Rules for Radicals. I think number 5 might have been, one of those pieces where you ridicule and you expose, and that's what they're doing every single day. Again, I can't say that I've done it perfectly. I don't think any of us have. We sin every single day, and we try to make up for that the best we can. However, and I know I've watched some of your videos. There's not enough people out there right now in America who are either fully aware of what's going on with the school systems, the K through 12 government-run schools, or they're aware, so they're malfeasant, and they just don't want to make that life-altering decision for their child to have to now maybe be pulled out of that school for homeschooling or a Christian school or something else. And it's just a lot of people with head in the sand right now. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do here in Maine and across the country is expose as many of these situations as I can, in hopes that as we near the midterms on November 8th, especially here in Maine, where we're trying to elect a new governor, currently Janet Mills is the worst governor we've ever seen in the state of Maine. Her Maine Department of Education, the MEA Teachers Union, a lot of these trans cult activists, they're just tearing these souls out of these kids. And again, parents just don't seem to care for whatever reason.
I totally agree with you. And this is a constant struggle I have not to blackpill in this scenario because, like you, I feel like I've been screaming about this for a couple of years and I don't even have kids. And I'm like, why do I care more about what your kids are learning than you do? And it's really difficult. And it is, and maybe we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but, it is really difficult to look at this stuff every single day and to see very clearly what's going on in the schools and to hold up a megaphone and say, look at what they're doing, look at what they're teaching. And it just seems like not that many people care, but we have to keep out there and fighting the good fight because, without people making noise like you're trying to do and like Gabs is trying to do and like I'm trying to do, then really like we really are lost. So how I kind of view it is, if I'm going to go down with a fight, I'm going to fight regardless. And hopefully people listen and they come along.
Yeah, and I think what I've been experiencing here the last couple of years. So I've been doing this for I guess a little over 2 years. Gabrielle Clark and I have she's been on the podcast, Main Source of Truth, and I really appreciate her advocacy and her activist work across the nation, in I think Arizona and Texas. But what I'm finding is it's either a fight or flight or flee kind of scenario, or when you say something like, "Hey, child pornography is in our local school library." And people kind of cock their head like a dog and look at you and kind of they don't know how to take that in, right? They don't know how to process that information. And then you show them books, you show them pages, you show them the Dewey Decimal System and the library system. And books are only one small component of what's happening out there. It's really a multifaceted, very well organized, heavily funded effort. And it's the same fight that Gabs is fighting now in Texas that I'm fighting here in Maine, because this whole thing has been organized by the left. And so
Yeah.
you can kind of go black helicopter theory if you want, but I've experienced it, and I know you've experienced it, and other folks have as well. And the real issue is, like I said, is some parents, they just, I don't know if they really want to know what's happening, because I'm 51 years old. When I went to school in the 70s and 80s, you could respect firefighters and police officers and teachers. That's not the case anymore. And teachers, unfortunately, they have been indoctrinated themselves. Many of the young teachers coming out of college, they've just invested into this whole woke nonsense, and it's this victim mentality that they're pushing. And so, anyway, yeah, we're trying to expose as much as we can, and we've done a pretty good job getting global attention on several of those stories.
And I'm really grateful you're doing this, and I think you're absolutely right. It's hard to explain, especially to I graduated from high school in 1999, so I'm a little bit younger than you, but not like significantly younger than you.
Yep,
And
yep.
I don't remember like going to school in the 90s. This stuff wasn't as prevalent, or at least not as pronounced. Now I do think it was starting to make its way into the school when I left, but I think what I'm seeing when I'm doing these investigations of schools around the country is we're really looking at like the mid to late 2000s when it really started getting entrenched in the curriculum. So I feel like I just missed it by a couple of years, and it really is difficult to explain to people who went to school in the 90s or the 80s or the 70s. What is going on in public schools today bears no resemblance to what you experienced in public schools. I mean, I actually have somewhere in a pile on my desk somewhere this textbook that used to be taught, I think, in middle school, teaching about how communism is bad and evil and wrong and antithetical to everything the United States stands for. That used to be taught in school. That's no longer taught in school. The opposite is being taught in school now. And it's really a matter of like waking people up and showing them it is a very different reality than what you remember. But how did you get involved in this? How did you, like, everyone always has an interesting story about how they got sucked into this world. What happened?
Yeah, so I always voted. I was never a political person. I enjoyed the outdoors. I was the president of my snowmobile club. I was on the Land and Conservations Commission. I hunt and fish, and like to just get outdoors. And so I always voted. I always knew what the issues were at the time of the elections, but I didn't think that anybody could change their local, even local scenario, much less a national effort. And on June 2nd, 2020, my twins were juniors in a high school, MSCD 51, which is in Cumberland, Maine, just outside of Portland. It is recognized generally as the best school in Maine. Okay. It's far from that. But we received on June 2nd of 2020 a letter that actually said white supremacy in it 4 times. And if I can find it here, well,
Oh
I don't know if I still
man.
have it. Yeah. Okay. So I still have it here. Let me take just a minute to read what this letter said. Now, this is on the back of, or the heels of, George Floyd's death, as literally Minneapolis is burning to the ground because of BLM and Antifa. Okay. So we had an equity committee that I wasn't aware of, paid for by taxpayers, and they had met for about a year, and they were just waiting for that match to be lit. And George Floyd, unfortunately, was that match. But it says here, "Dear MSCD 51 community, as a majority white school district," so I'll just stop right there. Maine is 94% white. Okay. Now I'm an Irish
Ooh.
American, fifth generation potato picker, whatever you want to talk about. But the fact that our state is white, it's a statement. It doesn't mean anything, right? We're not a bunch of white supremacists, but I'll get to that. "We stand in solidarity with Black movement leaders. We call for justice for George Floyd and other Black lives that have been taken by white supremacy in our nation. It's our duty to educate ourselves and dismantle the violent and oppressive structures which have kept us divided." And then she goes on through here. Let me skip through this a little bit. She talks about, "In a culture that continuously reinforces white supremacy," so that's now twice, "justice can only be achieved when we confront and repair the anti-Blackness woven through every aspect of our society, homes, schools, workplaces, etc. We cannot move forward until we reconcile the intentional barriers white people have built to harm Black people. barriers. Now, again, this is actually a white person writing this letter, just to be fully transparent. Barriers that prevent Black people from having access to rigorous education and safe and nurturing environments. There's nobody in Cumberland, North Yarmouth, Maine, who didn't have access to the best school in Maine. Okay. So then they talk about, again, we recognize that Black people experience violence every single day because of our white supremacist society. That's the third time. We are a committee of engaged parents, students, educators, and board members, all committed to working together and our future by educating our students that Black lives matter. Big B, big L, big M, the actual BLM company, Black Lives Matter. We continue to partner with Community Change Inc., which I'll mention. We are actively learning the supposed truths we've been socialized to believe about Blackness are violent and untrue. We will work to assess our curriculum, educate our community, dismantle the anti-Blackness all of us have internalized by living in a society built on what?
Whiteness, white supremacy.
White supremacy, and provide tools to interrupt anti-Black racism. And then it says, we grieve for George Floyd, we grieve for Breonna Taylor, we grieve for Ahmaud Arbery, and we grieve for all Black lives taken by, I guess it is 5 times, white supremacy. So that letter, when I read that, I was sitting at the table. We were all working from home during COVID. I turned to my wife and I said, do you believe what we're reading here? Like, where did this email come from? This isn't the town I grew up in. I had lived there for 20 years. Okay. I thought it was the best little town in America, Cumberland, Maine. It was the most affluent, most educated, and safest community in Maine. It was in the annual report every year. And so I was lucky to live there, I thought, right? So I sent a very polite email back to the superintendent. His name's Jeff Porter. He's a lying narcissist, by the way, and I have no problem calling him that. I can back all of that up. He basically then came out a couple of days later, and this was very polite. Like I said, like, hey, Jeff, you missed peaceful protest. You missed the First Amendment. You missed talking to your parents. You also missed that our police force is the best in the state. And again, that was put in the annual report, Town of Cumberland, every single year. He basically threw all those guys under the bus. So 2 days later, he came out with another statement, basically backing up his first statement. And the gist of it, really, Carlin, was you're not woke enough to understand what I'm trying to tell you. Okay?
Oh my
God.
He
had gone through this. He had gone through this training from Community Change Inc., which is out of Boston. They still exist. And their executive director, a lady named Shay Stewart Belay, you can follow her at Black Girl in Maine on Twitter without the E at the end. So Maine being MAIN instead of MAINE, at Black Girl in Maine.
Having the E would be white supremacy.
What's that?
Having the E would be white supremacy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So she's basically we're paying her tax dollars. I think it was $12,500 to hold trainings with the superintendent, the administration, and all the teachers. So think about all the payroll. My estimate was we had spent probably $200,000 in payroll over the course of a year dealing with this nonsense. And this lady on Twitter, during the height of, all of the riots going on and the BLM activists and just, the whole Antifa nonsense and again, cities burning to the ground all around the country, inciting violence. She was totally fine with the violence against white folks. She had sexual dysfunction. She had sexual concerns. She just spewed all this stuff out on Twitter. So I brought these tweets to the superintendent, Jeff Porter, again, the lying narcissist, Jeff Porter. And I said, Jeff, here are a dozen or more of her most heinous tweets. There's hundreds of them that I could give him. I said, I'd like you to read these out loud, word for word, and don't skip a beat. And he wouldn't do it. And I said, well, you're proving my point. Secondarily, during this meeting with the town council chair, the superintendent, and the VP, or the director of HR with MSCD 51, the chair person of the town council brought to him their June newsletter, which said something to the effect of, in order for us to eliminate racism, we must eliminate capitalism and move to a socialist and anarchist form of government. So I'm not making this stuff up. This is word for word. I still have the pictures, right?
I know you're not, because and I'll just interrupt. So what I tell people all the time, because we were talking before we came on the air about how I watch these woke trainings every single week on my the other channel, and in almost every single one of them they talk about abolishing capitalism, in every single one.
Yeah, except for these folks are actually they're grifters. They're basically grifting on mostly woke white women. No offense. But
Oh yeah.
basically, these soccer moms sitting around towns like Cumberland, Maine, thinking about, maybe some of their past indiscretions, whatever it is, their white guilt, their own internalized white guilt, and they're just eating this like sliced bread. It's no big deal to them. But back to the point, nobody has ever proven institutional racism. And again, I've been doing this for over 2 years, and every time I say, can you prove that there's institutional racism in Cumberland, Maine, in the United States, there's no examples of that, right? So
Right.
we went back and forth, and we went into the situation. And I know you've got a training on FOIA requests. In Maine's Freedom of Access Act, in some states it's FOIA, but it's basically that freedom that you can gain any information you want from any government entity. You just have to know how to ask for it. And so I think your training will be very important to folks. But I started doing that. I started FOIA requesting for records of this company, Community Change Inc., how much money we had spent, the payroll information. And as I dug more, Carlin, the worse it got. So I talk a lot about that. We're at that top 10% of the iceberg that you can see above the waterline. And we still haven't got to that 90% below the waterline that'll actually rip your hull from the ship. Okay. So long story short, I guess, and I'm trying to sort of surmise this first component, and then I'll take a breath. But this was an adversarial relationship. So they kicked me out of a school board meeting. I was ready to go to jail for my First Amendment rights. My wife was crying at the kitchen table one night at 6 o'clock before the meeting because she knew that I was ready to rock, and I would go to protect my rights, the rights of my children, and the rights of my neighbors' children, if that's what had to become. And I called their bluff. They caved on everything. This back and forth kept going for about a year. And in November of 2020, across the street from my house was the school campus, and there was a black fence there. And they allowed a honk if you support the school board banner put on that fence. It was actually a spray painted bed sheet right across from my house, where my twins, who were juniors, now seniors in high school, that we lived. And at all hours of the night, the leftists would go by at 2 or 3 in the morning, honking their horn. Now, literally did they know that I had actually been spending a lot of my time here in Hamden, and I'll speak to that in a minute. And my wife, unfortunately, was being woken up at 2 or 3 in the morning. So about maybe 30 days before the March 15th election, sorry, it was about March 15th. This is about 30 days before the general election for school board here in Cumberland. I had taken a picture of a lady who chose not to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance on our school board. And I had put that out on social media. It's still out there today. You can still find it. And I had made a small political side poster board of that picture, and I brought it to a school board meeting. And I walked down the aisle and I said, peaceful protest, as they kicked me out of the school board meeting. And I did that because the First Amendment, which I'm literally wearing on my sleeve today, protects your free speech and peaceful protest. And again, as long as you don't incite violence or use obscenities, you can almost say whatever you want about whomever you want, wherever you want, right? So when they kicked me out of the school board, I had taken that sign, I put it on my lawn, which again was directly across the campus of the school, and I put a spotlight on it because I knew this lady, Ann Maximowicz, who I will call an American communist till I die, had to drive by my house to get to her house. So she drives by, she sees this sign lit up, okay, and she freaks out. The next day she comes and hands a note to my daughter, comes to my house, uninvited, hands a note to my daughter, one of my twins, and says, this isn't free speech, this is harassment. And I basically took it and I put it right in the trash. And I said, no, it's exactly free speech. I can do whatever I want on my own property. Right. And this was all that sort of like, I think, and you mentioned tonight at 9:30, trying to have a lighter side of what's going on. This is pure evil we're dealing with. We're in this battle of good and evil, and basically Marxism or not. If you're either a Marxist or you're an American. Right. So she then came back, tried to talk to my wife, and tried to talk my wife into taking the sign down. The next day, I served her with a prohibitive conduct warning, basically a no trespass, so she couldn't come back on my property a third time. And she went batshit crazy, if I can use that word. The next day, she tried to serve me with a harassment order, which was completely inconsequential. There was no judge that was going to allow that to happen. And when she did that, I took that small political sign, Carlin, and I said to a friend of mine, how big can you make this photo? And he said, he said, I can make it a 4 foot by 8 foot billboard size sheet of plywood sized photo. And I said, well, how much is it? And he said $164. And I was like, oh man. I said, my wife is going to, and I told him the story and he said, I'll do it for 64 bucks. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
sold. So I put this giant sign. Now I have decorated it with Trump flags and American flags and multiple spotlights. And for Christmas, I had, Christmas lights and stockings hung and all this other stuff to just draw attention to the fact that we have, socialist American communists on our school board. And for 3 or 4 months, I guess I had this on my lawn. I take it down for Halloween and some things here and there. Now, as this story continues, as I took this sign down on January 1st, 2021, the very next day, Ann Maximowicz attacked me online. And I'll use their word, attack, right? They love that word, attack. Anytime you actually press back with words, it's attack. So I'm kind of tongue-in-cheeking that. But and so anyway, back up to getting close now to graduation. We're getting close to June and the election. I took that sign and I moved it across the street on the same piece of fence that had the honk if you support the school board banner on it, because the 14th Amendment says equal protection under the law.
Mm-hmm.
Within 30 minutes, they took the sign down. They then served me a prohibitive conduct warning, which basically meant the school board chair was not going to allow me to attend my senior daughter's my twins' senior graduation from high school. Now that became the big news. Now I hadn't planned it out that way. I basically just thought that I was going to be able to put this sign where this other sign was for at least 10 days like they did. And, the school board would continuously say, well, we never banned Mr. McBreairty from graduation. I have 5 different emails that say they did. And only until the 6th one did they allow me. And the only reason for that was Breitbart picked up the article on the Sunday, I think, before graduation. The Daily Wire picked it up on Monday. And then on, what day was it? On Thursday, I was on Tucker Carlson Tonight as the first in-studio guest. Tucker has a studio here in Maine at an undisclosed location that I can't give out. But I got to go on that and have that experience, which was amazing. I didn't know Tucker Carlson. I didn't even know he existed 1 year before I was on his show. I swear to God.
Isn't that funny?
Because again,
I
was not
totally
a political
understand that
person.
experience. Yeah, I understand completely.
So after that, Patriots across the country emailed the lying narcissist Jeff Porter, the superintendent of MS-80 51. He caved. He curled up in a fetal position and basically caved on everything. I went to graduation with no problem. And we were in the midst of moving, which then kind of takes me into my next story.
Well, let's do a quick pause there. And I want to say, Shawn, you and I are going to get along just fine. Like we are troublemakers of like a similar cut, I think. Which I think is a good and positive thing. Murphy Spool says 1999 WTF. Yes, I did graduate from high school in 1999. It's true. Don't tell anyone. I will deny it up and down if that news gets spread. And I saw another chat here I wanted to display on the screen. I am hungry says Shawn is a based Chad. Yes, I think that is definitely what we're finding out today. No, I mean, like but this is really typical, and what I love about your story is like you seem to enjoy the back and forth of it, which I actually think that like you said, this is a toxic environment that we're existing in. This is really hard. This is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. I'm sure that this has caused you and your family a lot of stress, and what I like about the fact that you seem to be having some fun with it is I think that if people can find like humor in the fight, or they can get those moments where they just feel like, oh, I got one against you. I think that can help keep us going. And I think it can help make us like give us more longevity in this space. And so I think that that's a really good thing. So you were allowed to go. So, okay. So you got picked up all over conservative media. And like you said, like, and I have some experience with this because, a couple of years ago, I had like an article go viral. I had never been involved in politics, not really in any way. And then I was all of a sudden like on all these shows and was like the conservative darling for 15 minutes. And I was like, what the hell is going on? What was that experience like for you to suddenly have your story kind of like all over the news when you weren't even involved in this stuff before?
Yeah, it was pretty overwhelming, to be honest with you. I'm an introvert by nature. That might not tell by doing this interview, but I think I can turn it on the switch and turn it off. I'd much rather be in my side by side with my dog hunting birds right now and just not talking to anybody. But what I felt is if nobody was going to stand up for my kids' rights, then who else was going to do it, right? So
Yeah.
for me, that was kind of I don't know, an integral moment that I said, I just need to do it. I need to take a stand. And again, I mentioned early on, I started out very polite behind the scenes, trying to work with the school administration. And very quickly, they doxed me and my family. They put us all at risk. And I had softball bats at every door. I was at a very exposed spot in the town. I wore my sidearm all the time. We had to install cameras. And even my twins, who used to walk across the street to the school, the high school was kind of a little bit further up the campus, but we made them drive to school every day because we feared for their safety, because the left is venomous, they're malicious, and they do not play by any rules. So those conservatives who keep thinking like, hey, let's just keep working both sides of the aisle and let's kind of just bring them together. It's nonsense. It doesn't work that way. We are in a confrontational politics world. And if you don't get involved, you're going to lose your rights, or your kid is going to come home someday and Billy is going to want to call himself Karen, and you're going to wonder what happened. Right. So we were able, but back to your question, and I apologize. It was overwhelming because at the same time we were gearing up for my twins' senior graduation, we were also selling our house in Cumberland and trying to move the family back to Hamden, where I grew up. I graduated in 1989 from Hamden Academy here near Bangor, Maine. And we basically had a real good opportunity to come back. My parents still live in the area. My wife's family still lives in the area. And so it just made sense for us to come back. So there was a lot going on, but it was the interesting thing when I was on Tucker's show, and I recently, I don't know, a couple months ago, I guess I did I had my 1 year Tuckerversary is what I called it. Right. So my 1 year of being on his show, I did an entire podcast dedicated to just kind of how that went. And the moral of the story was I should have been scared just crapless. Like, 4 million people seeing me on TV is not something that I was, waking up ready to do. But when I held my hand out, in the studio, it was just as steady as a rock, right? And I think it was because either the adrenaline or the information, I had now lived that story for a year. And even though I do love to, prioritize and prepare, I've got notes on my screen behind me here. It was something that I just felt comfortable talking about, and he was great. And so, anybody that would think otherwise, he treated my wife like a princess, and the entire group there was just amazing to work with. And I look back and reflect on that. But to some degree, it was like taking a little league pitcher, throwing him up to the major leagues for a weekend, and then kind of saying, okay, kid, now what can you do? And so I bounced around from there a little bit over the next few weeks. I did Harris Faulkner on Fox. That was really cool. Super nice person to talk about, especially, talking about racial aspects. Alan Jones from Sky News Australia was like the Walter Cronkite, basically, of Australia. That was a cool experience. And there was a lot of local national press. And so one thing I can say is that even though my wife supports the work that I'm doing, this has been very difficult for her and my children, because this isn't the dad that they were used to for almost 20 years, who again was kind of an introvert. At this point, I'm just like, hey, I'm going to keep exposing this and talk to whomever I can. And during that, yes, you mentioned kind of some of the joke aspects of it. What I figured was, if I couldn't make fun of the situation and how bad it was, I just thought I was going to go, mentally crazy.
Yeah.
And so the two things that came out of that is I found that I have a pretty cynical, sort of dry humor kind of attitude. But secondarily, I did start leaning back into the church, and I'm not going to Bible thump for anybody, but after 40 years of sort of keeping the church at bay, I had seen so much evil in people and the administration in our schools that I just had to go back and kind of say, I need to pick up the Bible again and try to figure out what greater plan God has for me. And I honestly think that God gave me these skills to stand up in front of a controversial issue. And it's not that I don't take arrows, because I take them every day, believe me. And you do, yeah. we get barraged with threats and all kinds of stuff. But I just kept saying to myself, until somebody else can stand up, I'm just going to keep pushing forward.
Yeah. No, I identify with so many aspects of your story, just like not really knowing what you were getting into when all of a sudden your face and your story is like plastered in front of millions of people. That is like an experience in and of itself. There's good that comes with it, and there's bad that comes with it. And it's like, what I really like though is like, it almost seems like you found your power in that experience. And I kind of went through something similar. Like when I kind of went viral, I was like, what can I do with this? And I wanted to use the opportunity to try to help people, to try to make a difference. And but I also really found my voice in terms of, what can I get away with? What can I expose? What can I do with this platform to show people the things that I've seen that are going on in the world? And I think that that's something that it's an intimidating prospect when you think about how big and how much exposure it is. I remember very distinctly when it was happening with me. I had a panic attack one day in the middle of Orange Theory, like on the rower, just I was like, millions of people are seeing this. What is going on?
Right.
But it is also something that gives you a lot of strength, and it is a powerful position to be in, and it is the only way that we're actually going to be able to elicit change is by using these platforms that we've been given to really show people what's going on. And so few people step up to the plate too is the thing. And I think that people like you and people like Gabs, you guys are the ones that I look to for inspiration and the ones that keep me going and doing this every day. And I think that it's important that we have strong people standing up and saying, this is not acceptable and we're not going to put up with it anymore. I also think, another aspect of what you just said that I really kind of resonated with me was the fact that you also got back into spirituality and picked up your Bible again. I'm not a Christian, but I do have very strong spiritual beliefs, and I absolutely have leaned very heavily on my spiritual beliefs. And also, like, kind of thinking that same line of thinking as you, is thinking like, there's a purpose for all of this, and maybe I was put into this position because I could withstand the arrows that other people can't. And I suspect that you are probably, one of those strong people that can withstand the arrows as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. On my podcast, I try to do a Bible verse at the beginning or the intro of every one. I'm still learning a lot about religion. I consider myself an American loving Christian. Whether or not they want to call me a Christian nationalist is entirely up to them. I love the nation and I love God. So I mean, whatever you want to do. But the real issue is, and you nailed it, is until we get mass non-compliance from everybody across the country, and let's just say that it's 70% of the country or 60% of the country or some majority of the country who doesn't believe that kindergarten teachers in Maine should be pushing hypersexuality on their kids, we're to some degree, that's a little bit of an echo chamber. And even though we get these fits and spurts of national media, I've had a number of articles in the Epic Times published here in the last few days about me, which is great. Jackson Elliott, a really very good young reporter. But so kind of building upon that, when I moved back to Hamden, I quit my job. I was the contract manager for IT with a healthcare company here in Maine. I quit my job and kind of wanted to just decompress. I'd gone through so much in that last year, and so much sort of burden had been placed upon me trying to be a good dad and trying to let the community know that what I was seeing wasn't what we should allow. I just kind of hit the pause button for a little bit. And it wasn't very shortly after I moved here that friends of mine that I hadn't talked to maybe in 30 years since high school said, Shawn, you spoke for the parents in Cumberland about critical race theory and exposing what was going on in MSED 51 in Greeley. Do you know how bad the school system is here in Hamden?
Oh
And I kind of,
no.
again, yeah. So I hung my head and I kind of said, well, tell me. And the more that they told me, the more I was concerned. So critical race theory is horrible. Because the easy definition for me for critical race theory is anytime that skin color is spoken over content of character, right? Anytime skin color is, you're either an oppressor or an oppressed because of your skin color. So that's
That's a
bad. And
great
certainly we
definition,
don't,
by the way. I'm gonna steal that
thank you.
definition. I
It's
have
the
a much more
easiest one I
longer.
could come up with.
Well, and
Yeah.
I'm always telling people, just to not to interrupt, but like I'm always telling people, you have got to memorize the definition of critical race theory. I don't care which one it is. I don't care how wordy it is, but you have got to memorize the definition.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I grew up with Martin Luther King and content of character, and it doesn't matter what your sexuality or your sex or your skin color or your nationality, it doesn't really matter. Now, up until the point of if you're an asshole kind of scenario, I don't care. Again, if you're a jerk, you're a jerk. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to tolerate that because of your skin color or your sexuality sexuality either, correct? So
Mhm.
within that, I pressed pause for a little while, and I started to do some more homework on hypersexualization of minor children in our school system, and that's 100 times worse. Because what is being taught by the MEA, the Maine Teachers Union, which is an offshoot of the NEA, the National Association of Educators, or whatever the piece is. And this teacher named Kelsey Stoyanova, who is the Maine Teacher of the Year here in Maine, just happened to be a Hamden RSU 22 teacher. And in her press release, it talked about a book list. And my radar went up very quickly when I read about the book list, and I started to do some homework. And it wasn't 30 seconds, Carlin, that I determined both that she was pushing critical race theory because she was pushing books from Ibram X. Kendi, aka Henry Rogers, who is one of the biggest race grifters out there, getting $45,000 an hour on Zoom meetings from people in Virginia and all across the country. But she also was pushing basically anti-police, anti-father, critical race theory, LGBTQ, transgender, and hardcore kiddie porn in a book list that was pushed to minor students, many of which were in the middle school, Reedsbrook Middle School here in Hamden, Maine, RSU 22, with daily announcements, prizes, and incentives. And there was no age restrictions on these books. And so I mentioned early on that, or maybe off the air, books is just one strategic component of what the left is doing to indoctrinate your children, to hypersexualize them, to normalize pedophilia. And these same teachers are asking 11-year-old kids to pick their pronouns in class. The next offshoot from that is, if you can get an 11-year-old to pick your pronouns, you can get an 11-year-old to pick your sexual partner. And it doesn't matter if that sexual partner is a 35-year-old math teacher. Okay. So we started to do a lot of homework and exposure on Kelsey Stoyanova. That landed me on Laura Ingram's show, the Ingram Angle on Fox, where we talked about a book called Middle School's a Drag. And that was just one of hundreds of books on this list. Kelsey Stoyanova, the Maine Teacher of the Year, an 8th grade teacher, who for some reason is still allowed to teach in this district, was pushing and trying to normalize, basically, I'll call them trans strippers. I won't call them drag queens. They're trans strippers in middle school. Okay. And so when you connect the dots to what's happening all across the country, including here in Maine, where parent teacher organizations and Kenny Bunkport, for example, were sponsoring transgender stripper events in the city square, the hypersexualization is just so much worse. And so I went from a situation where after I quit my job, it's now been 14 months until I haven't worked in 14 months. And I've been trying to raise funds both through the podcast and just speaking in general on a Give, Send, Go account, which is Give, Send, Go / Shawn McBreairty, where essentially I'm trying to fight a lot of these legal battles that we've come up against. And that's maybe the third chapter in the story, is these legal situations that we've had to work through with these local school boards.
Yeah, let's get into that in a second, guys. But I do just want to let you know that Sean's Give Send Go is available in the description below. I definitely recommend that you support him, and I think that all this stuff is really important. This is why part of the reason I'm doing these webinars with Gabs, and by the way, we should talk about doing webinars too, Sean, because I'm expanding the webinar program. Is I really think that we need to make activism entrepreneurial, to be honest. And for the
Yeah.
webinar with Gabs tonight, like, we're charging $20, and her and I split it to cover the technology costs and our time and stuff like that. But I do think that it's really important that we support people that are actually out there doing activism. And if we can teach people something about how to do activism or how to fight back in their communities in the same way that you've been doing it in Maine, I think that that's all the better, because the more people who are fighting back, the less burden it is on each and every one of us. And so I think that that's wonderful, and I definitely would encourage everyone to make a donation to Sean and his Give, Send, Go, and all that information is going to be in the description. So you're focusing in on legal battles. How did that happen?
Yeah, and actually, one thing I forgot, to be honest with Carlin, is I've got
Yeah.
2 testimonials, from one from a student here in middle school and one from a teacher, that I think will be pretty powerful for your audience to hear, if I can take a
Yeah,
couple minutes to do that first.
please do
So
so.
so I call myself an advocate. I don't talk about being an activist. To me, an activist has got a bullhorn on the corner and they're just yelling nonsense and they're throwing signs up, and they don't really try to solve anything. They're just trying to make a spectacle of themselves. But students, taxpayers, parents, and now teachers of Maine have come to me over the last probably year or so, a little more than a year, and say, "Hey, Sean, can you speak for me, because I have a business, or I'm a teacher, or I'm a student, or I'm concerned, or I have a job, or whatever it is. So this young student from Reedsbrook Middle School, again, where Kelsey Stoyanova teaches, came to me, and these are her quotes. My experience at school this year has been awful for many reasons. I've been made to feel extremely pressured about all the LGBTQ plus things being pushed at my school. Signs around my school telling me that I don't have to use my assigned gender when I can make my own up, pressuring kids that are 11 years old to label themselves. I've been harassed and verbally attacked this year for not putting a label on myself. I'm tired of having to defend myself constantly to others. I'm scared and anxious all the time at what's going to happen next with a constant push of sexual orientation comments. I feel like I have depression and lots of anxiety because of what's happening in school. Now, that's from an 11-year-old student in Reedsbrook Middle School. That's the life every day when they get off the bus to go to school. Their level of anxiety and depression jumps through the roof. And the other thing that's been caused by the last 2 years of this political nonsense called COVID, right? The pandemic of COVID political theater, is we've created an entire generation of children who are going to have mental health, anxiety, and depression issues like we've never seen before. Okay. Now the second piece is, I mentioned teachers. Teachers don't dare to say anything because their teachers union or the Department of Education or their administration will fire them. And I have teacher friends who have been basically let go for this nonsense. And this teacher here, again, from RSU 22 says, quote, I've seen a progression over the years to include younger and younger children in the concepts of LGBTQ plus, gender identity, gender fluidity, and sexual language. Initially, I thought it was to prevent bullying, but as time wore on, it was clear that wasn't the intent after all. The discussions and signs all over the school aimed at young children really alerted me to the grooming of children. Yes, grooming. That's what sexual predators do to children, exposing them for sexual content, language, and visuals repeatedly to take advantage of them for their own perversions. We as a society separate movies and TV shows according to what is developmentally appropriate for certain age groups, but now we use cartoon drawings of naked people doing sex acts, and that's okay. It's not okay. It's sexual abuse. There are other teachers that agree with me. However, we cannot speak up. The climate is that if you don't agree with the sexual grooming, then you will be the target. Those of us that disagree are afraid of losing our jobs if we speak up. I had a student confused and concerned, thinking that he might one day wake up as a girl. Now, again, this is a teacher in this district where the Maine Teacher of the Year, Kelsey Stoyanova, has been acclaimed for her basically, her wokeism. She is the wokest teacher in Maine and thus won the award. But what they're doing, again, is they're hyper-sexualizing these children. And it's devastating, really, when you think about it.
I definitely agree with you, and I have some more questions about that. I just want to display
Sure.
Savritz's super chat real quick. Savrit says CRT equals program perceptions creating placebo racism. I absolutely agree
Yep.
with that. They're seeing racism where no racism exists because they see race in everything, like you explained earlier. So I definitely think that's correct. I mean, part of the thing that's so difficult about this ideology for me is, I don't do as much with the grooming and the gender stuff because I just find it terribly toxic to look at. It's really, we were talking about this webinar we were watching last week on my other channel where they were putting kids on the internet talking about race. Well, I don't know if you remember what happened in the Burlington school district, but so these Friday happy hours actually exposed what the grooming in the Burlington school district, where Burlington, Vermont, was putting 12-year-old seventh graders on the internet talking about how they were coming out as trans in the fifth grade
Right.
with the help of the guidance counselor. It ended up on Laura Ingraham and Ben Shapiro and all that stuff. And it's just like, I remember sitting there watching those webinars. I just stumbled upon them accidentally for happy hour. And it was like, it started off as a gag at first because we have fun on happy hour. And then as they kept going and as we started seeing these children talking about, how they're trans and the guidance counselors are helping them and they're doing all these things related to gender in middle school, it's like your heart starts to sink after a while and you just, you go into a really dark place with it. And Incognito says LGBT is being used as conversion therapy by the left. I don't think that's far off. How has it been for you as not only a parent, but as someone who I'll use the term advocate, as an advocate for parents, in really speaking up about what's going on in the schools, how has it been for you to come to that realization for yourself about just how bad things have gotten?
Yeah, it's one of those things where every day I get another student or a parent or a teacher sending me some information across the state or across the nation and asking for my help. And
Yeah.
so it every single day I say a lot of times like I shouldn't be surprised by what I'm seeing, but every day I'm surprised because again we're only hitting that top 10% of the iceberg, and we're just now starting to dig and get under the waterline. And so yeah, I mean to me hypersexualization, the way I define it, is it's anything outside of the comprehensive sexual education, which in Maine is mandated in ninth grade. Anytime you're talking to a student, anytime an administrator or a teacher or a counselor is talking to a student about sexuality without their parents being right there beside them, to me, that is hypersexualization. I don't have any problem necessarily with the actual sex ed curriculum. Again, the teeheeing of putting the, condom on the banana and the whole deal, whatever. However, that's not what's happening anymore. These kids from the word go, from kindergarten, the Maine Department of Education, on my YouTube channel, and you can just search for Shawn McBreairty. I think it's actually under Craven Fan because I was a big NASCAR fan at one time. But there are dozens and dozens and dozens of videos you can see of me and others speaking at school board meetings and also exposing things like the Maine Department of Education, who were pushing to kindergartners. They were pushing learning concepts to teachers to push to kindergartners that would say things like, doctors sometimes make mistakes of the gender when kids are born, right? And so I'm not a very smart guy. I just say, hey, look, you're either born with an innie or an outie. It's not very hard to define what sex you are. In my opinion, transgenderism is a mental illness. It's not a situation that you can think yourself into becoming a man or a woman if you're not already. You can't surgery your way into becoming a man or a woman, no less than you could surgery your way into becoming a helicopter. And the what I say is, if a 7-year-old kid thinks that they are a helicopter, you probably would not allow them to go to the top of the school and jump off thinking they could fly. But these teachers are pushing these kids into this LGBTQ cult. And I'll say mostly it's trans cult, because I have friends that are lesbian and gay and bi, and they hate this stuff. They don't want their kids manipulated in school with our taxpayer dollars, because the kids are being failed on the very basics of education. Here in this
Yes.
local district, 6 out of 10 Hamden Academy senior or kids in high school can't do math. They're below or well below the state guidelines in math. 36% of Maine kids can read at a fourth grade proficiency level. So only 1/3 of the kids in Maine can actually read in fourth grade. It's the same stat, 34% in eighth grade, no math. So again, 1/3 of the kids in Maine, no math. They're basically missing the boat on basics of education because they're spending so much time and money, taxpayer money, on this LGBTQ hypersexualization, because many of these teachers feel like they want allies to come into their world, and they don't care if those kids are 5 or 6 years old, as long as they say, hey, Mrs. Smith, I'm glad that you're trans. Well, that kid has no idea what trans is, much less they don't know what a transformer is, much less a trans, adult. And again, these kids, they don't, like, innocence is lost. That's one of the things that I say a lot, is when the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't stuff it back in. When that innocence is lost because a child has been hypersexualized, groomed by a teacher, an administrator, a librarian, or a counselor, you can't get that back. And it's so, again, a ramble, but to answer your question, it's way worse than we think it is.
It is way worse than we think it is. And just so people know, if you're new to my channel, I do investigations all the time of the public schools, and I just go through their websites and I show people the documents you can find. Like you started off by saying that in the high school that was causing you guys the problems, you found out they had this equity committee for years. Well, I can find an equity committee in almost every school in the country right now. It's right on their
Yeah.
website. You can go and find it, and you can even find their meetings and see what they're doing. And so I show people this stuff all the time. But another thing I wanted to touch on that you said is Well, it is way worse than people think it is, and people really need to that's the scary piece that I think a lot of people don't wanna confront is just how bad things are. But, have you heard this story of the high school in Randolph, Vermont, where the girls complained that there was a trans woman in their locker room, and so they were the ones that got kicked out of the locker room? Have you heard about this story?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's the same. So in Hamden, just like it's the same policy, a transgender policy here in Hamden. And many of the schools in Maine, if not most of them, have the same transgender policy that Loudoun County, Virginia had. And you may remember in Loudoun County, Virginia, a trans, well, I guess yeah, trans girl, a boy actually with biological boy parts, raped a young girl either in the bathroom or the locker room because he took advantage of the policy. The school board then covered it up. The superintendent shipped that boy out of town, and that boy raped another kid in another school because of the same transgender issue. So those things I say to parents all the time, don't make me say I told you so. These transgender policies that are in place are to protect less than 1% of the population, again in my opinion, somebody who has mental health issues, and puts 99% of mostly young teen women, girls, young women at risk for their lives to be ruined because we don't dare to say to somebody, nah, dude, go use the other locker room that you're supposed to use because you've got those parts.
Yeah. And well, and the reason I bring that up is, I've often thought that if I was in school today, I absolutely would have been transitioned by the school teachers and the counseling staff. I was a tomboy, I had short hair, I hung out with the boys, I wanted to play on the boys' sports teams, all that stuff. And the
Right.
reason I bring up that story about that specific locker room is that was one town away from where I grew up in rural Vermont. That was 10 minutes away from my house that I grew up in. And so that one hit home, especially for me, about just like how it really is like impacting everyone, no matter where you are. That's in rural America. That is not a large urban high school. That is a very, very small rural high school, probably with 50 kids in the graduating class.
Yeah, I mean, and again, Maine has 1.3 million people. We're a pretty spread out state. Our biggest town, Portland, has roughly 85,000 people. So very similar situation. We have, I think, over 250 different school districts in Maine. And the majority of them, I tell parents all the time, pull your kids out tomorrow. Do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Do not delay. You can teach them and homeschool them. You can find a way. It is that important because if not, you mentioned civil rights teams. Um, Chris Rufo about a month ago outed and I'd been working on a number of things too, the gay sexuality alliances that were in 4,000 different schools across the country in 40 different states, taxpayer funded in many cases, like Herman, a school district right next to me that is suing me, a taxpayer, for exposing their misuse of taxpayer funds with things like the Gay Sexuality Alliance. We had a teacher, Mallory Cook, and again, this is the next town over. So people say to me, hey, Shawn, you don't have kids in that district. You don't even live in that district. And I say, yeah, you're right. Except for I had a concerned parent send me pictures of a 40-book transgender library display put up in the high school by Mallory Cook and $1,000 grant from the local teachers union, the MEA, the Maine Teachers Union, of which they displayed 63 different genders. And the more I dug into that school, the more I found that there was a GSA written on the extracurricular activities.
Yep.
So if you had kids, Carlin, just think about this. You could either send them to soccer, band, chorus, or talk sex after school with a 40-year-old teacher without you ever knowing it. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
That's what's happening in every school. So people that are in the chat, if you don't know what a GSA or the Gay Sexuality Alliance is in your school, you're going to want to do some homework because you're probably funding that like taxpayers were for Mallory Cook. She was the paid faculty advisor to this extracurricular activity. And as I mentioned, because I exposed that, this district, Herman School Department, is trying to sue me to throttle my First Amendment rights so I don't keep exposing them because it's driving them crazy.
Yeah, and I don't care. Like I hear this excuse all the time. This excuse drives me crazy. You don't have kids or you don't live in that school district. What business is it of
Right.
yours? It's all of our business. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
These are people that we pay. Like, this is all of our business, whether or not I live in the town or whether or not I have, like, I'm still paying property taxes in my town. I don't, doesn't matter if I'm using the schools or not. So, I dismiss
yeah.
people who are saying that out of hand is just not being very serious at all. But it's funny that you brought up GSAs, because this is another thing that we're finding when we're doing these school investigations. In fact, just yesterday, I was working on one, Austin, Texas, which is next level crazy town. But in Texas, what we're seeing is that, like, the GSA stuff is so prominent in this town. And not only do they have GSAs, but they also have community partners and outreach organizations. And so, in addition to looking up, if you have kids in school, definitely look up and see if they have a GSA. They're either going to call it a gender and sexuality alliance, or they're going to call it a gay straight alliance. And for our purposes right now, they're basically the same thing. But also make sure you are looking up their community partnerships and whatever community organizations they're working with, because some of these community organizations, they report to no one, and these are the people that attract the real social justice warriors, that are going to be put in front of your kids at some point. Let me just take a couple of super chats while Shawn is doing something over there. Savrit says, our true identity is who we are behind the eyes. I agree with you on that one, Savrits. And then I think we got a question for you, Shawn. Shawn, are you still there? He's muted. I've lost his camera. I don't know what's going on. I hope he's still there. Well, hopefully Shawn comes back. But guys, please mount that like button if you have not already. Shawn's back. Yay. Shawn, I thought we
Sorry,
lost you.
we had a little laundry action here going on.
Oh, that's okay. That's
Sorry.
all right.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
they didn't kill me, Brent. What was the question? Sorry.
So we actually have a question, super chat from the Brooklyn Way, and Brooklyn Way is looking into a lot of social emotional learning programs in, like, North Carolina specifically, and she says the CRT and CSE are part of SEL. The comprehensive sex education includes the literature plus gender forms kept secret, and she's wondering, do they also have these gender forms in Maine?
Yeah, and so social emotional learning is the next wave. So when you look at it, we went through critical race theory, we went through COVID political theater, we've gone through hypersexualization. The next nomenclature is social emotional learning, which is funded by Bill Gates, and we know how great a dude that guy is. But
Mhm.
basically, what they're trying to do is push intentional outcomes on children through this emotional therapy, and making teachers like their psychologists, which they're not trained to be. SEL is just another way to say, SEL basically stands for critical race theory and hypersexualization. It's the gateway drug to those two things. And so all across the country, they're all leading through the same playbook. We're seeing the same language used in all 50 states. Now, some states like Florida or Texas or Arizona have advantages over places here like Maine, because in Maine, I mentioned the worst governor in the history of the state, Janet Mills. We also have a Democrat led legislative process. The House and the Senate are both run by Democrats, and the Attorney General's office is as well. So, to answer your question, yes, social emotional learning is the next worst thing. And it sounds great on the surface, and even some teachers think it sounds great. But I would argue any time that a teacher is not spending specific time on math and science and English, then they are doing something that the parent needs to be working on, which is, again, the socialization of their own children. There needs to be no taxpayer funds spent on social emotional learning in any school, in my opinion.
Yeah, I call social emotional learning teachers practicing psychology without a license. It is completely unnecessary in schools. It is not something they should be focused on. It's not something they're trained to deal with. They have no clinical hours. At very best, they take a seminar, and they think that makes them an expert on like cognitive development for children. Like, I'm an actual PhD psychologist. I've barely done any childhood development, but I've certainly done more than most of the teachers that are teaching in schools, and I still wouldn't do clinical work with kids because that would be ethically irresponsible of me to do. So it's certainly ethically irresponsible for teachers to be doing it. Um, but so I wanted to add, so I also wanted to mention, though, you talked about, and I totally agree with you about how teachers aren't even teaching the basic fundamentals: reading, writing, math. I think those numbers that you gave are from the nation's report card .gov, and I really want to encourage every parent, look on nationsreportcard.gov and find out what the proficiency rates are for your school in terms of just like the basics. They've been tracking this stuff for decades. And what we see on a nationwide basis is roughly 36% of high school seniors graduate from high school not knowing how to read. So 36% know how to read, the rest do not know how to read. 33% of seniors graduate from high school knowing how to write. 26% of seniors graduate from high school knowing how to do math. These are abysmal rates. And Shawn is absolutely correct when he says that the money that the schools are spending are on building out their diversity and equity teams. A lot of schools will not only have a diversity director, but they will have several people under that diversity director to work with the teachers to make sure they're integrating it into the curriculum. And every moment that they are spending teaching critical race theory or doing social emotional learning or doing things about gender or any of that is a moment that they are not teaching your kids how to read, write, and do math. And that should probably be the priority. And as Savrit says, we are dealing with a convert or kill force. Do you agree? No, I wouldn't go to that extreme just yet, but I think that we're on our way to getting there. I just don't think that we're there yet. Shawn, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the thing that's tough there is I think that they are trying to destroy the morality of America, the traditional American family values, whether or not you talk about conservative Christian values. They're trying to eliminate all of that. And again, this is a Marxist revolution that has been infiltrated within the American teachers organizations. And again, that sounds like I'm putting on my tinfoil hat, but after again doing this for 2 years, I believe that we've found evidence that that's true. And a lot of these forces, unfortunately, a lot of these kids, in my opinion, in the next decade, we're going to have more kids commit suicide because of the grooming that's occurring from these teachers than we have maybe in the last several decades combined, because these kids are just all kinds of messed up right now. And they don't know how to deal with this. They're not equipped to deal with this. As we all know, people's brains don't develop until they're 25, 26, 27 years old. And yet we think that a 7-year-old can fully commit to being a trans kid, or in states like Washington, they can do double mastectomies or top surgeries on these kids really without their parents even being involved. I mean, it's so to what degree is this a kill strategy? It's killing an entire generation of Americans, in my opinion.
You know what I keep saying, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this because I too feel like I have my tinfoil hat on when I say this is about Marxism at the end of the day, but I've just seen
Mm.
so much of it now that there's just no getting around it. And what I tell people is that the four goals of the woke left are as follows: gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. And everything
Yeah.
they're doing, from the stuff going on in the schools to creating havoc over the Roe v. Wade ruling, or election fraud, or all this stuff, like, which of course election fraud doesn't happen YouTube. I'm saying the voter ID laws. That's what I mean, YouTube. I'm not saying that the election was totally fine and perfect. I've gotten strikes on this channel for less. Um, but like but there, you have to look at it through the lens of, if you want to understand what the woke left is doing, you have to understand they want to gain as much power as possible so they can destabilize the system, attack capitalism, and usher in their Marxist utopia. Am I wrong?
No, you're right on. You're spot on. I mean, and I think again, the easy way to do that, and what has happened is incrementalism has worked for these folks for decades. And in the last 2 years, I think what they did is they cranked the dial up to 11, right? They basically blatantly now will tell you, hey, look, if you don't like the way we're teaching your kids, in fact, a teacher in Herman did this last night, and I'll probably be putting up a YouTube video today or tomorrow on it. She said, take your kids elsewhere. This is a government paid employee that we pay with our state, federal, and local taxes, telling parents, if you don't like the way that we educators who have gone to school to educate teach your kids, then go somewhere else. And I say, yes, parents, that's exactly what you need to do. You need to
Yep.
pull your little kids out of these schools immediately, because you are the only one who has a chance to save them. That's it. It's as easy as that. And if you don't think that you have time, or you don't have the energy or the money, then frankly, you're just a bad parent at this point, because it's malfeasance. We're telling you what the problems are. There are dozens and dozens, if not hundreds and thousands of examples all across the state and across the country of what's going on. And these parents continue to keep their head in the sand.
I agree totally and completely, Sean. And I can tell you that if I did have kids, they wouldn't be setting one foot near public school at all. I would do whatever was required to be able to homeschool them, find homeschooling pods, work with other parents in the community to figure something out. I think there are
Right.
like all options need to be on deck because it really is that bad. And and if you think it's inconvenient now to homeschool a child, how inconvenient is it going to be when they come home wanting surgery and then end up as a lifelong medical patient as a result of the indoctrination that is being delivered to them at the hands of the public school, and has been happening since they were 4 years old, when they didn't have, as you said earlier, the cognitive ability to remotely defend themselves from what was happening. They need parents to stick up for them and to be the first line of defense to say, you're not going to do this to my kids. um, do you believe that the public schools can be saved?
Not the way that they're no is the quick answer. Not the way that they're currently constricted. These schools have taken, in my case in Cumberland, it was 70% of my property taxes went to the local school. In North Yarmouth, I think it was 85%. It's now 53% in Hamden, but the majority of property taxes in Maine go to these school systems. The amount of administrative infrastructure has exploded over the last couple decades. Teacher salaries really haven't gone up that much, but these schools continue to basically just pack in these administrative, highly paid administrative jobs. And the return on investment is worse and worse every single year. No business could survive like this if they were a real business. But because it's for the kids, we just keep throwing good money after bad, or bad money after good. I forget how the saying goes. But I don't believe these schools can be saved right now. I think the entire thing needs to be stripped down. The Department of Educations need to be figuratively burned to the ground. Parental rights needs to become a big initiative. And I talk about educational freedom all the time. That is a no strings attached process where your property taxes follow your student. They don't go to the brick building that you live near just because they're in the town you're in.
No, I completely agree. I think the public schools are a lost cause. I think that school choice is a good option and it's something we should certainly consider. But I also think that a lot of people are fooling themselves if they think that school choice is going to fix the curriculum in schools. Because my position on this is that it starts with the teaching pool, it starts with the staffing pool, and so you can't just change the teacher staffing pool just because you can move them to the school down the street. Because the private schools, the charter schools, the public schools, they're all hiring from the same teacher staffing pool. And where this is all becoming really corrupted is in the colleges of education that are training the teachers, and then they're having to go by the state licensure guidelines, who oftentimes are requiring anti-racist training or woke training on an ongoing basis in order to maintain teacher licensure. So all of the schools are hiring from the same staffing pool. Until you fix the staffing pool, school choice doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot, and it's certainly not going to change the curriculum. Am I wrong about
Well,
that?
no, you're right on the money. And what I did a podcast about homeschooling. I think it was my fourth or fifth podcast in, and I talked to three local moms here, and one of the moms off the air said, "Oh man, I wish I had said this." And I said, "What were you talking about?" She said, "If you're afraid to homeschool your kid because you don't think you can teach them math, or you don't think you can teach them science or geography or history or whatever, just jump out of the airplane and do it without a parachute, and we will catch you on the way down. There are pods, there are all kinds of resources. You don't, I mean, there's nobody who can teach your kid better than you. Nobody knows your child and their needs better than you as a parent. I'm lucky that my kids have graduated from from high school, and I'm trying to keep them not getting indoctrinated in college. But if I had a fourth grade kid, I would have pulled them out immediately, and I would have quit my job, and I would have made it my sole duty to train them basically on education, and I would learn as I go. Again, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm very diligent and I'm detail oriented, and I can kind of work through those concepts. But to me, again, that was a powerful message from this mom, this homeschool mom. And I've heard from moms across the state and across the country that said their very best decision they've ever made in their life was to pull their kids out of these schools. because they are basically woke wastelands at this point. Now, in the chat, if I can go, one of the folks said something about hitting them in the pocketbook, and maybe we can
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit.
Let's do that. I just want to display this super chat. DK Me, thank you both for what you are doing. Thank you, DK Me. I appreciate that. I also appreciate 1111 because that means it's an angel number. If you ever see 1111, that means the angels are with you. And I have to hope that the angels are with you, Shawn, that they're looking over you, guiding your work. And I think that they are. But let's talk about hitting them in the pocketbook. That's what we're doing for our webinar in about an hour and 45 minutes or so. Talk to us about suing the schools.
Yeah, and so what happened in my local district here in RSU 22 Hamden was I went and I started to expose, again, Kelsey Stoyanova, her book list that had pornography. All Boys Aren't Blue. You can look up that book. It's just horrendous. This is a book that they were pushing, again, in middle school to 11-year-old kids through daily prizes and incentives and announcements. And so the school board chair, Heath Miller, who first off doesn't know his own policies, and that's something I'd tell your listeners. The moment you read the school board policies, you already know more than the school board folks because they don't read their own policies. I don't know if they can't read or they don't want to read. They just choose not to understand what their policies are. So use that to your advantage. Secondarily, pick up yourself a little copy of the Constitution and read the First and 14th Amendment, the first being a huge piece. Again, you have protected free speech. So I went up there and I spoke. I played an audio recording of me in the chair, Heath Miller, of which I was describing a book. And I described that book and I said, Heath, would you want your kids, he has daughters, to read this hardcore anal sex book, is what I said in the audio recording. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I'm not too far off. He said, basically, pornography is okay as long as it's within the context of a book. Now, I couldn't believe he said that. So I played the audio recording. This guy was seeking re-election, of which he won, by the way, if you can believe that. And he instantly gavelled me out of the building because he knew as soon as I hit that play button, I was going to play for everybody, including everybody watching on YouTube. And I have this video on my YouTube channel. If you want to go again, search Shawn McBreairty. You can hear his words and the words of Bill Tracy, the principal. They both say the same thing. Pornography is okay in a book in our library as long as, you know, we're not forcing it. It's not curriculum. And as long as there's like a love story around it, then it's fine. So we had to sue our local school district, again, because they kicked me off campus. They served me with a no trespass that said I couldn't go back until the end of the year, which meant I couldn't even go to any of the community events on campus. I couldn't go to my alma mater's football game on a Friday night, all because I was exposing the hypersexualization of minors. And so we sued them. An Obama-appointed judge in a 28-page document actually said, yep, he has protected free speech. And you can say anything about anybody, anywhere you want, as long as you don't use obscenities. And obscenities to me are the 7 things that George Carlin said you couldn't see on TV. That was, one of his comedy acts from years and years ago. And then you can't incite violence, which I've never done nor ever plan to do. But the only thing a school board can do for your folks is they can limit your time. So they can limit you to 3 minutes of public comment, but you can say whatever you want. And if they essentially try to bark at you to say you can't, you can just say the First Amendment provides me protection from free speech. Are you willfully withholding my First Amendment rights? And then you have a case. Now, I'm not saying it's easy because in my case, Mark Randazza, my lawyer, who is a hot shit, by the way, he came out of the blue. And I truly believe that I was blessed. A friend of his sent him my story. We talked for 45 minutes on the phone. And I quickly realized this guy, he is a First Amendment advocate, a national lawyer. And when we worked out a program where if I could crowdfund, so again, if I can plug that givesendgo.com/Shawn McBreairty, if I could crowdfund it, we would hit back on these school boards. We won $40,000 from my local school board. Now, hitting it in the pocket, I guess, is a little bit of a misnomer because first off, none of these school board members have to pay out of their own pocket. The taxpayers actually had to pay me. And in the way it works here in Maine, in most cases, is it's a $10,000 deductible for the school department, and the rest is picked up by their insurance. So what I said was, I didn't put 1 penny of that $40,000 into my pocket. I went to pay my lawyers, and the rest is going into essentially an offensive legal fund that we will then fight Herman. And when we beat Herman, I will use that money and I will look to people in Maine or across the country who need help with a lawyer, because believe me when I say finding a lawyer is very difficult to fight these issues. There are not that many that are willing to pick up these cases, because 75-80% of the legal institutions, or even the legal process, they're pretty much, they kind of lean left pretty heavily on the whole legal front. So it's a difficult scenario. But to answer the question, I guess, of one of the folks in the chat, yes, I would love to hit them in the pocket, but it doesn't really work that way. However, the only thing that does work that I've found is having a judge bang the gavel and say, you're wrong. And this guy can continue to expose what he's exposing. And if you don't like it, then just don't say anything. However, you can't limit what he says.
Mhm. Well, I think it's great that you stood up and you fought back, and what I hope most of all about your story is that it gives other people the strength and the inspiration to give it a shot themselves. And like I said, in the webinar that we're going to be doing with Gabrielle Clark in about an hour and a half now, she's going to be talking about how she helps parents find lawyers, how you gather evidence, how you do all this stuff, and she works tirelessly to kind of do matchmaker with parents and lawyers to make sure that parents have representation. But one of the things she always says, and she says it to me constantly in private, and I hope she doesn't mind me sharing it publicly, is that she connects parents with lawyers all the time, but that parents don't call them. They don't call them to pursue their case because they're
Yeah.
scared. They don't think that a lawyer will take them seriously. They are worried about what it'll mean for their family. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your thought process and how you worked through those
Yeah.
issues?
Yeah, certainly. And most lawyers that I've spoken to will offer, let's say, a half-hour free consultation to even see if they want to take the case. So, I mean, just ask a lawyer, hey, am I being charged for this? Or are you going to give me the free consultation, half hour, or sometimes an hour? But yeah, to me, cancel culture is one of those things that all they have is name calling, right? And if you can lean into the resistance or lean through that sort of membrane of being called names because you are speaking the truth, and they don't want you to speak the truth, well, then you've already won. That's half the battle. Okay. And then the second half of that battle is, yes, making sure that you pick up the phone and call that lawyer and find the right lawyer for you who's willing to work for you. I mean, Randazza Legal Group and my situation in the Center for American Liberty, they've been godsends to me, and their work is top flight. I mean, hundreds of pages of information that they've basically worked on my behalf. But yeah, to answer the question, if somebody like Gabs is connecting people to folks like Center for American Liberty or some of these organizations out there that are willing to support conservatives or willing to just support the First Amendment, regardless of the situation, you have to then take that step forward. And does it mean that you're going to be, again, called names, or maybe you're going to become the local media darling for some period of time? Well, is it for the right thing or isn't? I mean, it's kind of like, do you believe in truth and justice or do you not? And if you want to just stand back and wait for your rights to be dissolved, that's kind of where we're at, right? Again, confrontational politics is this world that we're living in. And parents and taxpayers, citizens, students, teachers, whomever, they just need to take that one step forward. And I think what they'll find is once they can get some momentum, it's just like, again, how do you eat an elephant? You eat it one bite at a time.
Mhm. Well, Shawn, as we're kind of wrapping up, I want to ask, do you have any regrets about jumping into this crazy world, and kind of what are your thoughts kind of looking back on your experience over the last 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, there's many things that I would do differently, but there's no playbook for this, right? Like I'm making this
Yeah.
stuff up on the fly, and I'm learning a lot about human interactions, human psychology, what buttons I can push. And what I've found is, unfortunately, unless I throw a very loud grenade, generally speak, people don't pay attention to what's going on. And that's the world we're living in, right? 30-second sound bites and trying to starve people for their attention is a very difficult scenario. But there's certainly things that I would do differently. I think about that a lot. But all I can do is continue to go forward, try to grow as an individual, as a human, try to do the best I can to support again other parents that are out there seeking advice. And for me, again, I did mention, I kind of have this sort of cynical attitude, this somewhat humorous approach to the process. And folks can see that on Twitter. They can follow me at Shawn McBreairty, follow the YouTube channel. Main Source of Truth podcast. You can find on Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeart, all kinds of different places. And you'll find, including Gabs, dozens of educational experts across the country that have had an experience like mine. And again, just keep pushing forward.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the work you're doing, Shawn. I really appreciate you putting yourself out there for all of us, and especially for the parents in Maine and the kids in Maine, especially. The work you're doing is important. I love everything that you had to say on the show today. I think that it's rare that I find people that I feel like I agree with everything that they're saying and they've got a really good handle on the situation because, like you said, it is hard. There's no playbook for this, and a lot of us are just doing the best we can. So thank you for coming on the show today. Thank you for your contributions and your work. And, I'll look forward to hopefully having you back in the future and continuing the conversation.
Yeah, and like I said, I would love to have you on my podcast. Let's work on that in a couple weeks, maybe. And yeah, just
Absolutely.
like I said, for everybody out there, whether or not I have stood up for the right reasons, again, that's sort of my burden. I think it is. I think I've got the truth behind me. I've got facts and diligence behind me, and the law. But yeah, whoever it is that you're looking out there for, just try to think about just taking that one step forward, and whether or not that one step is going to a local school board meeting, maybe putting in a FOA or a FOIA request about the curriculum or books or whatever it is. Just take one step forward, and you don't have to run a marathon like I've ran, but just take that one step. And I think you'll find, if we don't have more people doing that, we are going to lose this country, because it's that bad right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Well, guys, again, I want to encourage you to donate to Shawn's Give, Send, Go campaign and support all of that. And his information is in the description below. Shawn, I'm going to pull you off the screen for a second and do a little bit more shilling, and then we'll wrap up after we go off air, okay?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you. All right, guys, that's all we have for today. And again, please make sure you follow our guest on social media. Mount that like button for me if you enjoyed the chat. I do just want to remind you guys that I will be going live again on this channel at 9:30 tonight for Nothing Remotely Controversial. If you've never checked it out, don't be scared away by the psychics. You don't have to believe in psychics in order to come and have fun. Actually, a lot of people who watch don't believe in psychics, or they claim not to, but they really secretly do. But we do have a great time with it, and come and hang out with us tonight and ask your questions and get some answers. Joshua is freakishly accurate in his predictions. Freakishly accurate in sports predictions, actually, which is funny because Joshua doesn't watch sports, but he does get a lot of stuff right. So come check it out if you haven't already. And just as a reminder, there's still time to register for this live webinar that I'm doing with Gabrielle Clark in an hour and a half. Now, if you are watching this after the webinar has already happened, it will be available on demand at activelyunwoke.com. So I will work very hard to get it set up on demand as quickly as possible. But if you can get to the live version in an hour and a half, all the better, because you're going to be able to ask Gab's questions. She's going to be able to give you some answers and talk to you about what you need to do to sue your school, just like Shawn did, following that example, because this is one of the most powerful weapons that we have. And I really want to encourage everyone to do it. If you have a case, it's really important that you step up, and Gabs can help you step up. Lastly, and Shawn had mentioned several times that people don't know how bad it is. Well, I'm trying to give people the tools to find out how bad it is on their own. I'm developing right now a training program to teach parents how to search through school websites, how to utilize public information to find out exactly what the schools are doing, from equity committees to the GSA, to going on their social media, finding their social media posts, to reading their documents, to understanding the language that they're using. All of that is going to be part of my Schools Exposed training program that will be launching in January, because we are at 114% of our crowdfunding goal. And thank you to the 113 people who have made contributions so far. There's still some great perks we can get. I would love a marketing budget for this program. My goal is to run 10,000 parents through this program over the next couple of years to make sure we have an army of parents just like Shawn that are fighting back and defending all of us, and really exposing what the schools are doing. I promise you guys, it's all out there publicly. They have such hubris about this stuff. They brag about it all the time. I can show you where to find it. I can show you how to understand it. All I need is for you and parents to show up. So you can find out more by searching for Schools Exposed on Indiegogo. You can also head over to unwokearmy.com/parents in the ticker below if you want more information about that. All right, guys, that's all I have for this stream. I got to head out for right now, but I will see some of you guys at 9:30, and I will see some of you in an hour and a half at our webinar with Gabs. Take care. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.